Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're witnessing a shocking and historic turning point in Eastern Europe. Belarus has exploded into chaos. The army, once loyal to President Alexander Lukashenko, has turned against him. The regime that ruled for nearly 3 decades with fear and control is collapsing from within. What began as whispers of dissent within the military has transformed into a full-scale rebellion. The unthinkable has happened. The foundation of Lukashenko's power. The Belarusian armed forces is now rebelling, and the total collapse of his rule has begun. For years, Lukashenko was considered one of the most unshakable figures in post-Soviet politics. He portrayed himself as the guardian of stability, a strong man who kept Belarus out of chaos while maintaining close ties with Russia. But beneath the surface, his regime was built on suppression, manipulation, and fear. Every election was marred by accusations of fraud, every protest crushed by force, and every critic silenced. Yet power built on fear is fragile. When those who enforce your rule, the army and the police, begin to question your authority, the entire system starts to crumble. This downfall didn't happen overnight. The signs were there for years. After the 2020 elections, which many saw as blatantly rigged, hundreds of thousands of Belarusians took to the streets demanding democracy. The regime's response was brutal. Thousands were arrested, tortured, or forced into exile. But the resentment never disappeared. It simmered quietly in the hearts of citizens, and crucially, within the ranks of the army. Soldiers saw their own families suffer. They watched as their nation's sovereignty eroded under Moscow's influence. And they began to ask themselves a dangerous question. Who were they really serving? The people of Belarus, or one man clinging to power? Tensions reached their breaking point after Lukashenko's increasing dependence on Russia. As Putin's war in Ukraine dragged on, Belarus became more and more of a pawn in Moscow's strategy. Russian troops stationed on Belarusian soil, weapons transferred through its borders, and military exercises disguised as power displays all turned Belarus into an extension of Russia's war machine. Many Belarusian soldiers hated this. They had sworn to protect their homeland, not to fight someone else's war. That growing resentment inside the army was the spark waiting to ignite. According to reports emerging from multiple regions, the first signs of rebellion came from a division stationed near the western border. Soldiers refused orders to move equipment toward Russian-controlled zones. Instead, they issued a statement declaring that they would no longer follow criminal commands that serve foreign interests. The video spread across social media like wildfire. Within hours, other units across the country began to follow suit. Bases were seized, communications disrupted, and loyalist commanders detained. For the first time, the Belarusian army was not enforcing Lukashenko's power. It was dismantling it. Lukashenko's reaction was pure panic. He appeared on state television, visibly shaken, denouncing the rebellion as a Western-orchestrated coup. But his words fell flat. When a dictator loses control of his army, his words lose their force. Reports surfaced that several generals, once seen as his most trusted allies, had defected or gone missing. Government buildings were surrounded by rebel troops. High-ranking officials were fleeing the capital. Even the state media began to fracture, with journalists refusing to broadcast official propaganda. The machinery of dictatorship was breaking down in real time. Meanwhile, the streets of Minsk and other major cities erupted in chaos. Citizens poured out by the thousands, waving the banned white-red-white flag, a symbol of the Belarusian resistance. For years, that flag was a mark of danger, but now it had become a banner of hope. Protesters embraced soldiers, chanting for freedom and unity. It was a surreal scene. The very army that once cracked down on demonstrations, now standing shoulder to shoulder with the people. International reaction was swift and uncertain. Russia, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. The Kremlin called the events an internal matter, but everyone knew what that meant. Panic. Belarus has long been one of Moscow's key allies, a strategic buffer zone and staging ground. The collapse of Lukashenko's regime would send shockwaves through Putin's sphere of influence. Some reports indicated that Russian military advisors were evacuated from Belarusian bases as the situation deteriorated. The West, on the other hand, reacted with cautious optimism. European leaders called for calm but expressed support for the Belarusian people's right to self-determination. Behind the scenes, negotiations and power struggles were underway. Rebel leaders announced the formation of a provisional military council, promising to restore order, release political prisoners, and hold free elections. Opposition figures in exile welcomed the move, but warned of the dangers of chaos and possible Russian intervention. Belarus, a country long suppressed under one man's rule, now faced the uncertainty of freedom and the potential price it might bring. Inside Lukashenko's circle, paranoia grew. His security units were split, with some defending the presidential palace and others surrendering without resistance. Eyewitnesses described convoys of black vehicles leaving government compounds under cover of night. Unconfirmed reports claimed that Lukashenko himself had fled Minsk, possibly seeking refuge in Russia. Whether he escaped or was captured remained unclear, but one thing was certain: the center of power had collapsed. The emotional weight of this moment for ordinary Belarusians cannot be overstated. For decades they lived under fear, afraid to speak, to protest, even to dream of freedom. Now, despite the chaos, hope filled the air. Crowds gathered around government buildings chanting, "Vive Belarus!" Long live Belarus. It was the same chant that had echoed during the failed uprising of 2020, but this time it carried the power of victory. Soldiers saluted the crowds. Political prisoners were being released. The air was thick with both relief and disbelief. After 30 years, the dictator's reign was over. But as history has often shown, the fall of a dictator is only the beginning. The road ahead for Belarus will not be easy. The country faces political vacuum, economic instability, and the looming threat of foreign interference. The challenge now is to build something new. A government that truly represents the people, not one imposed by fear or external control. Rebel leaders have called for unity, warning against revenge and chaos. The world watches to see whether Belarus can transition peacefully, or if darker forces will try to exploit the moment. What makes this moment so extraordinary is that it wasn't sparked by foreign invasion or organized political opposition. It was the people's own army that turned the tide. Soldiers who had once been instruments of oppression became instruments of liberation. It's a rare moment in history when a nation's protectors remember their true duty: to defend the people, not the regime. Lukashenko's downfall, if confirmed, will be remembered as one of the most dramatic collapses of authoritarian power in modern Europe. For nearly 30 years, he ruled through loyalty, propaganda, and brute force. But in the end, his greatest strength, control of the army, became his undoing. When soldiers stopped obeying, his power vanished overnight. The same uniformed men who once stood between the people and freedom became the ones who tore down the walls of tyranny. Belarus now stands at a crossroads. Its people have fought, suffered, and sacrificed for this moment. What happens next will define not just their future, but the future of Eastern Europe itself. Will this rebellion lead to democracy and freedom, or descend into instability and division? The world can only watch, but one thing is already clear. The old order has collapsed. Lukashenko's time is over, and a new chapter in Belarusian history has begun, written not by fear, but by courage.